All right, I think we're good. Thank you guys for joining us for SACAC 2021 virtual conference. This is a student search session. We're going to talk through some different opportunities, innovations, and just give you some things to consider as you look at what is going to be well, probably already is, a new search landscape for your institution. A couple of things to note as we get started. If you have questions, there's a Q&A section down at the bottom of your screen. We'd ask you to place all of your questions in that section as opposed to the chat so that we will actually get your questions and we will be responding accordingly. And then Liz McKenzie from the College Board will send you a copy of this slide deck once we are done, and she will have all of her contact information in the deck. So that'll be coming as soon as we are done with the session. I'm going to turn it over to our other panelists to introduce themselves, and Liz, we'll start with you.
Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you all at SACAC. I'm Liz McKenzie, and I have been at the College Board for now 16 years and am excited to be co-presenting with Mary and Jason today about search.
Hi, I'm Mary Wagner. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management and Executive Director of Undergraduate Admissions at the University of South Carolina, located in Columbia. I miss everybody and wish we were all together in person.
I'm Jason Black. I'm the Assistant Vice President for Enrollment Management at Samford University, and I echo their sentiments. We would love to be in person. We know that day is coming soon. If you would have told us 15 months ago that we would have 12 months of this, like this next cartoon shows, I guess we'll call it the 12 months of COVID instead of the 12 days of Christmas, we probably would have been excited, and this was funny back then. Now that we're on month 15, I think some of us are kind of getting worn out and we're ready to move on. But definitely would have taken 12 months had we known what we were going to get when all this started. We know there's a lot of changes and there's going to be more changes coming. So we hope this session will provide you just a little bit of a kind of a glimpse into what that's going to look like, maybe some adjustments that are already being made and how specific areas are going to respond to some of these challenges. So to kick us off, I'm going to turn it over to Liz.
Thank you, Jason. So before we can really talk about search, we have to talk about what's happened with the SAT during the time of COVID. And so I'm going to focus on this more in just a second, but health and safety have been top of mind for us at the College Board. We have also wanted to obviously have a quality delivery of the SAT. We expanded opportunities for students to be able to take the SAT by adding school day options in the fall of 2020, as well as September 2020 as a weekend administration. And we also wanted to communicate a great deal to students, to parents, to school counselors, and to higher ed professionals about what was happening with the SAT. Our top priority, as I said, was on the health and safety of students and staff. And so test centers for the weekend had to follow local public health protocols and College Board requirements. That is still happening for these spring assessments. And that continues to mean students and staff must wear a mask the entire time they're at the test center. Students must be seated at least 6 feet apart during the entire test. And students and staff must confirm a series of COVID safety statements. I am certain that later this summer, more information will be made available on what our protocol for the fall will be, but this is continuing through the May and June administrations. We did some other things to help students in terms of testing, and this is for our SAT school day and for the PSAT NMSQT. High schools were able to do off-site testing, meaning if there was a location in their area that they could just take students to where they could follow safety protocol in terms of social distancing more easily, we were A-okay with that. Schools were able to test their students on multiple administration dates, again, to be able to spread students out for social distancing. And as well, on the same test date, schools could use flexible start times if that helped with space or the use of proctors. And schools could either use these options independently or together. So flexibility was name of the game for our school day activities. So what happened with the class of 2021, right? They were the most impacted in terms of being able to take the SAT. And so what you can see on this chart is a comparison between 2020 and 2021. So in 2020, 2.2 million students took the SAT. So far, through the end of March, for the 2021 cohort, 1.4 million students have been able to take the SAT, and that is globally. What I also want to show you, since we're at SACAC, is what's happening in the South, or what happened in the South. And you can see by the gray bar, 411,000 students took the SAT for 2020. 384,000 students through the end of March had actually registered for an SAT for the class of 2021. And at the end of the day, just over 300,000 students were able to take the SAT for this current 2021 cohort. So demand was very high for students in the South in terms of wanting to take the SAT. And overall, we had good opportunity for students to test, though clearly not in every case. So what's happening in the future? The first thing to note are test dates that have been happening will continue to happen this spring for the SAT. The column in the middle gives you the fall 2021 SAT test dates, both school day and weekend administrations, as well as the test dates for the PSAT and MSQT. While we are here, I think it's useful for me to say that through our March administrations, over 500,000 students have been able to take the SAT thus far this spring. For the March weekend test, 72% of test centers remained open. That compares to 40 to 60% back in the fall in terms of test center openings. Close to 84% of the students who were registered for the March weekend administration were able to test, and that falls between 35 to 52% from last fall. So things may not be fully back to normal, but we are normalized and getting better, and we have high hopes for the rest of the spring and certainly into the fall for normality for students to be able to access the SAT. The last thing I want to say here is that we want to reduce and simplify demands on students. So you likely have heard we discontinue SAT subject test, and we also are discontinuing the SAT essay. So Mary, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. And as if all of the pandemic impact on testing pipelines isn't enough, we also know that there is a projected decline in the number of high school graduates in the United States, beginning with the class of 2025. And so I was looking through the list of attendees, saw a lot of familiar names on both sides of the desk, as well as some new ones. But unless you've been living in a cave for the past 3 years, you should know that what we're looking at is this echo following the 2008 recession, where people started to have fewer kids, maybe put off having kids, or didn't have any children at all in response to a lot of the economic pressures that were thrust upon us after the 2008 recession. And so this has important implications for higher education overall in terms of our pipeline. Next slide.
Sorry, Mary, I was looking at attendees. And so now,
Well, this is advancing that. She's going to show you the knocking at the college door information. And so if you haven't bookmarked Witchy yet in your browser, you should, because periodically they go out there and provide updates. And so one of the things that came out in the December 2020 edition of Knocking at the College Door was projections about increases in graduation rates that are really starting to kind of mitigate some of those projected declines between 2018 and 2026. And so you see a little bit of a U shape there, but they ended up being a little bit higher than what we would have even discussed 12 months ago. And so that's a great thing that more students are going to be graduating, but we also know that the birth rate still is an impact. And then we also know that once the birth declines come into play, and we start to see that you're going to see different racial and ethnic groups impacted at different levels. And so if you would advance to the next slide, you'll see here that white population is going to be in decline between now and 2036. The fastest growing population is Hispanics, Latinx. You see a little bit of up and down, but mostly flat for Black students, slight increase in Asian and Pacific Islander, two or more races, and pretty much flat for Native American. So a lot of this is being dictated also by IPEDS definitions. We know, for example, that a student who may identify with a race other than Hispanic, they may be Hispanic in ethnicity, but also account for themselves as Black and white, would be reported as Hispanic in IPEDS definitions. And so that's part of what you're seeing here. You wouldn't see students identifying with other races in addition to being Hispanic. Next. The Higher Education Demand Index was developed by Nathan Graw, and he wrote Demographics and the Demand for Higher Education, which has been kind of that toolbook, that toolkit that higher education and enrollment managers have been looking at now to see how different groups of students and what are going to respond to the wanting to go to college at different levels. And this is broken out by different regions of the country, demand for 2-year as well as 4-year higher education, and also 4-year higher education sorted out by selectivity as defined by proportions of institutions in the top 100 of the U.S. News and World Report, the next tier, which would be selective, and then the least selective tier of 4-year higher education. And there's a lot of variance there in terms of which kinds of students are going to be pursuing different types of education. And so what you can see here is, based on Dr. Graw's projection here, we know that we're going to have about a 5% drop in the number of high school graduates that are projected to go on to 4-year colleges between 2020 and 2030. And so if we know that there's significant local and regional variation, that may drive how students are looking at your institution, if you're from a college, or how students in your high schools are looking at different types of institutions within their immediate community, or if they're looking farther afield. So I find that this is really interesting. This demand index was based on the 2002 Education Longitudinal Survey, which is pre-pandemic. And I think what will be really interesting to see is how the impact of the pandemic, the proportion of students that we know that have opted out of higher education on the whole as a result of the pandemic, may be thinking that they're going to go back to school eventually, but may never, ever return based on local and family demands, need to work and things like that, or whether or not there will be a migration towards students doing micro-credentialing, and whether or not that has an impact or some sort of direction for higher education to respond in some way, and how this is measured. So this will be something to really be, I'm looking forward to his revision of this demand index once there's more national data to show how different populations are responding to the demand for higher ed. Next slide. So why are we mentioning all of this, right? You know that if you're going to be at an institution, 2-year or 4-year institution, you're going to be participating in some sort of search. And so College Board has search products. Our institution, University of South Carolina, as well as Jason's institution, we are big search users. Search, yes, can be done through College Board, but it's done a variety of ways. And the focus of this particular presentation is how College Board tools can help augment and improve your search. And so for the remainder of the presentation, we're going to talk a little about what the licensing process is like for student search, enrollment planning services, which is research that colleges can use to identify territories of interest, and then ultimately segment analysis services that focuses on geodemographic variables that can help further strengthen your outreach and your focus when you're traveling to certain communities. And upon looking at a lot of the attendees, I saw people from the high school side as well. And I think it's really helpful to kind of know how maybe some of this stuff, the search stuff works, because I know a lot of times students come in, they're like, I don't know how I got on this college's mailing list, or why this is happening. Or maybe you're being asked whether or not a student should include their email address when they're filling out their registration for an assessment, and how the inclusion of that information, or at least opting into search, can help a student find their best fit college, which is what we know we all want for our students. And so when we're talking about college board search, we are still talking about the largest database of college bound students in the country, because of the types of assessments that are offered through the College Board. And as we are learning at the University of South Carolina, as they're trying to reshape the way search names come out or are available to colleges, the new data are indexed weekly. And data loads are going to occur from different assessments at 15 times a year. And so if you've been in admissions as long as I have, you know that College Board search or any kind of search was kind of a one and done, or you might have done it twice a year and you just kind of set it and forget it and wait for stuff to come back to you. But now search is this year-long thing. And if you don't have a plan for doing things throughout the entire year, you may be missing key opportunities for your institution. So let me just give you a little bit more background. Liz mentioned, you can go to the next slide, Liz. Liz mentioned the PSAT and the National Merit Scholar Qualifying test participation. In the fall, there were about 1.4 million participants in the PSAT, and what I like to call NumSquat, because it's easier to say that than all the acronym for that. And then the winter administration of that included just under 500,000 students. And so those were admitted in the fall as well as in January. And I wanted to mention that schools could choose to administer these tests in October, which is the usual time, or if they wanted to push that administration back, they could do it in January. So you all who are on the high school side are probably painfully aware of these timetables and all, and we appreciate your staying on top of that. So, but this is this is that foundation that many institutions really rely on for finding college-ready students, or students who would be a good fit for their institution. And then next slide, Liz. And we know also that a lot of the national data that we have available through College Board search is that if they're participating in search, if your student opts in and says, I'm willing to be contacted by institutions, that does increase a student's chance of being enrolled by 12%. And so the way I often phrase that is, you have to show interest to get interest. If you want to be found, be findable. So I'm going to turn it over to Liz. Or is it, yes, Liz, you're next.
Yep.
Thank you.
I don't know why my slides are not advancing when I want them to, but we'll get there. Thanks, Mary.
Do you want me to try to take over from here?
If you would like to, sure. Okay, I just approved you, Mary. We'll let you be Vanna. Thank you.
We'll see how this goes.
There you go. So this is the data load schedule. And for those of you who manage search on your campus, I know you all know this schedule because I have walked into offices and this is on your bulletin board. And I want to call out that we actually made an update last week on April 15th, and I will note that in just a second. What you can see on this schedule, first note that yesterday, April 19th, new names became available to you from the second March SAT school day. So there are new names available from that assessment as of yesterday. But I've given you a nice little color code in terms of looking at the red arrows are for all the different dates where you are most likely to find 2022 students within search coming to you with SAT, both school day and weekend administration. And then the purple arrows are PSAT 10. And I would encourage you, if you are doing early pipeline building for 2023, to go in around these two different dates to look for 2023 students. We know that more students have taken the PSAT 10 because schools often just made PSAT and MSQT just for 11th graders this year, just due to spacing. And then the last thing to call out is the little checkerboard marked arrow, which is for AP, and that is the date change. So that August 2nd is the date when AP names will be available within search. And as you know, you're going to be able to find 2022, 2023, 2024 students with the AP search. So just go in, for those of you who like this new chart, and just print out a new copy because this one is now updated. Mary, if you can move to the next slide. Look, you're much better than me. So Mary made reference that students are flowing into search sort of all the time, and that is what this flow chart represents. Students can still opt into search when they register for the SAT and just before they take AP or PSAT exams. However, students can also opt into search when they create a College Board account, when they check their scores, when they link their Khan Academy account to their College Board account. And so quite literally every Monday, new names are being added into search. And a best practice is to either go in and do very regular sweeps of the same students you were looking for just a few months ago, because you're going to find new names today, or you can set up a standing order so those names are just continuously flowing your way. If you're not sure what I mean by any of that, you can certainly follow up with me, and me or one of my colleagues can talk you through that. Mary, we can go on to the next slide. So there has been lots of buzz that we sort of have heard at the College Board. Well, gosh, there's no way you can have any names because people couldn't take the SAT. And so what I want to show you over these next few slides is for the 2022 cohort, we already have over 1.8 million students who are available in the database. 1.5 plus million of these students have a PSAT score. 497,000 of them have an AP score, and 480,000 of these students have an SAT score. And you can look over to the right and see that there is a great deal of diversity. And so you can feel confident in terms of who is in the search pool. And so Mary, if you go to the next slide, we're going to stick with the 2022 cohort. And thank you. And a question I've been getting, particularly over the past several months, is, gosh, we realize we'd like to do more outreach to first generation students. So that is captured within search. And you can see there's 325,000 plus students whose parents have no college whatsoever, 332,000 students whose parents have some college but do not have a degree. The other thing to note, because I also get this question frequently, is, hey, what about grade point average? Can I search on GPA? The answer is yes, and you can see that a huge number of students do have GPAs in the system for search. And so the next slide is just the same information, but for 2023. So again, if you are building your pipeline out, and I know most of you are doing that for 2023 already, you can see there's already 783,000 students. 550,000 of those students have a PSAT score. You can see similarly, these students also have good diversity in terms of the pool so far. And then Mary, on the next slide, y'all can see that again, if you are seeking first generation students, and an idea is if you want to reach out to kids as they're finishing 10th grade, heading into 11th, it's a great time to connect with first gen students because there's a longer story to tell them, if you will, in terms of not just your college, but what is college and why college. And then similarly, many of those students have GPAs. So in terms of the new, for those of you who are search users, you hopefully got this announcement a couple of weeks ago, but we have announced, we know it's a hard time, it's challenging times for higher ed. So we really want to help in the moment to get students connected and to help you with innovative tools. So 3 things are happening come fall of 2021. Interest in My College will become available to all search users just within the search portal. We are adding filters to improve targeting. More information on what those filters will come in the next several weeks. Also, prospect notification, where we will let you know what best fit students you are missing. And again, more details about that will be coming in the next several weeks. And the last slide that I want to cover on this front is just a pricing update. And again, this information was public earlier this month. We have remained at 47 cents per record the past 2 years, counting this current year. And our new price per record starting September 1, 2021 will be 50 cents per record. The 3 new features I just mentioned will be available at that same price of 50 cents per record. And there is no longer an additional subscription fee for Interest in My College. I will say super quickly, if any of the campuses are interested in Interest in My College today to use throughout the summer, we are doing prorated contracts for those campuses. You just have to sign a contract by the end of May. So certainly reach out to me pretty quick if that's something you want to know more about. But Mary, I think I'm handing it back to you.
Yeah, you
Thank
are.
you for being Vanna.
Thank you. Vanna is from South Carolina. I just want to mention that. So we share that. Okay, well, let me talk about some of the other recognition. Oops, sorry about that. Are you taking that back, Liz?
I did not mean to, no.
Okay. I can give, let me go ahead and give you the control.
I was trying to look at Q&A, Mary, so.
Okay, you can have the control. You have it now.
Okay.
Let me talk to you a little bit about some of the national recognition programs that have been developed as of late. And a lot of these are newer. You're probably familiar with the one for National Hispanic Recognition Program, which has been around since, well, for 36 years now. And we know that program in particular has linked up a lot of Hispanic students with individual colleges, many of which will offer additional funding for students who qualify for that particular recognition program. But since fall of 2019, students who are African American, as well as Hispanic American, Latinx, Indigenous, and or from small towns are eligible to receive recognition as well. And then this fall, College Board is going to be launching yet another program for Asian and Pacific Islander students. And so we know that they're working with specific organizations that have ties to these communities. Some of the ones that I think are interesting to note. So, for example, the African American Student Recognition Program is aligned with the Jackie Robinson Foundation. The Asian and Pacific Islander Student Recognition Program is aligned with Asian and Pacific Islander American Scholars. The Hispanic program is the Hispanic Scholarship Fund. Indigenous Student Recognition is the Indigenous Education Incorporated. And then the Rural and Small Town Student Recognition Program is aligned with the Jack Kent Cooke Foundation. And so College Board reaches out to students to let them know that they are eligible for these programs, but there also are ways that students need to make sure that they're opted into search to qualify for that. And so the way that they do that is this way. So you have to have a student who takes one of the PSAT, NumSquat, P10, or AP exams, okay? So, and then if they achieve the minimum required scores in any of these assessments, and just know that those minimum qualifications can vary based on which state you're in and how many students are graduating from high school in those respective states, so those minimum qualifying scores can change. Of course, you probably all know this. You could teach me more about this than I could teach you, but you have to have a minimum cumulative GPA of a 3.5 or higher, and then identify with one of the groups that is eligible for the recognition programs. Next slide. And then there's junior eligibility ways to get in, as well as sophomore eligibility ways. And so it's very, very similar. You'll find, the only difference between a lot of these is, what year you are in school. But, if you're a junior eligibility candidate, you will have had to take the P10 in spring of sophomore year, or the PSAT and MSQT in fall of junior year, and then get those minimum scores. Or you could have earned a 3 or better on 2 or more AP exams in your freshman and sophomore year, which I think is a really nice alternate criteria, and have that cumulative GPA of a 3.5 or higher, and then be a member of one of these eligible groups. And one thing I wanted to mention too is that if you have students who don't live in the United States but attend school abroad but are U.S. citizens or qualifying non-residents, and they're taking a part in these assessments, you can still qualify for some of these recognition programs. Next slide, sophomore eligibility. You'll see a lot of similarities here. again, take that PSAT in the fall of the sophomore year and achieve the minimum requested score, or have a 3 or better on 2 or more AP exams in your freshman year and have the cumulative 3.5 or higher by the middle of your sophomore year and identify with one of the eligible groups. And for institutions that are looking to find these students, we know that there may be some institutions will offer additional scholarships to recognize students who qualify for some of these programs. I know many institutions already do this for national merit, for example, but we're also hearing and learning that there are more and more institutions that are using other types of scholarship incentives to attract these high quality students, high achieving students. Not that they aren't all high quality. So yeah. Anyways, let's talk a little bit. I don't want to spend too much time talking about the University of South Carolina's experience, other than to just say that we are longtime student search service participants, and we have a very robust campaign. We work with a third party who works with us to help identify different market opportunities and assist with buys. They also help execute and deploy and fulfill search for us. And so we found that partnership has been really good, in that the results, the juice is worth the squeeze, at least in our view. But one of the things I wanted to mention that we did to kind of augment student search this year is we do have one of those subscriptions to Interest in My College that we've been using over the past year. And it's still a little bit early to tell, but what you may be thinking is, well, wouldn't a someone who's gone through search also probably end up in Interest in My College? And I was looking for some of the overlay on that. And it's actually a really low level of overlay, at least at our institution. We found that only about 3% of the students that we picked up in Interest in My College were students that we also searched. And search students, because we are searching students that we think are eligible for admission to our institution. And so we have, a lot of different segments and things like that for trying to identify candidates, and they're admitted at a very high rate. But we are seeing that among those who came in through Interest in My College, they're actually, if they were admitted, they're yielding at a slightly higher rate than a searched student. So they may account for a smaller proportion of our overall applicant pool, but they're actually yielding at a higher rate. And that should follow naturally, because you just know that a student who goes out there and says, you know what, I'm interested in the University of South Carolina, I want to share my name with that institution, probably has a greater degree of interest or commitment, pre-commitment to the institution than somebody that we might pick up who has never heard of us before but finds us through search. And so that's just good to know, and to understand that those are pretty good sticky leads for you. And then we are also longtime users of the enrollment planning service, which we do annual trainings on with all of our recruitment staff, and use that very heavily, not only to plan a lot of our travel, but also to help understand the competitive and the market landscape across the state, and also in many of our top feeder states. And it really, I find that it's been extremely useful for having conversations with the leadership of our institution, to have conversation with our legislative liaisons when they have a very narrow view of what's only happening in their state or a certain part of the state, to be able to put information within a larger context of how our neighboring states or other states that may have competing institutions with high rates of overlap. It's really, really useful data for having a deeper, more contextually based conversation with interested constituents. And so if you aren't using enrollment planning services in that way, or you're not using it at all, we found that it's been a very useful, very valuable tool for just generally understanding your market and being a better enrollment manager, and being able to have a more informed conversation with people who are interested in your work. So I'm going to turn it over now to, I think, Jason. You're next.
Thanks, Mary. Great stuff. Liz, let's try to move there. We go. One of the features Liz mentioned earlier is through College Board, is called segment analysis. And there are many, what some call geodemographic tagging tools that many folks, in admissions and sit on our side of the desk that we use, and we use them for many different reasons. There's two things that we want to make sure we talk about as we think about post-pandemic search. One is really understanding why we're licensing students, because the relevancy of the way we licensed before is probably going to be questionable because the source are going to collect names in different manners. Those names are they're going to respond differently. You don't have a historical data set to understand how those sources are going to respond because those sources are in some cases being acquired differently. And so using some type of demographic tool to give you an idea of, are you even in the right spot? One of the things we did recently was we went through our process asking 2 questions, which is, why did we license this name and what are we going to tell them? Those are really, if you don't know why you're going to license that name and you don't know what you're going to tell them, then you really have to ask yourself, is that going to be a good name for your inquiry pool? Segment analysis is something we've used, I think, probably 12, 13 years. Used to be called Descriptor Plus, and it morphed a little bit several years ago. So we've got some experience using it. And generally speaking, what it does is it allows you to look at names from a more strategical perspective. You get to kind of drill down on larger zip codes or larger DMAs or other type of ways to segment population, whether it's by tract or so on and so forth. So we get the opportunity to drill down at a deeper level. You get the opportunity to see from a national perspective where these segment analysis, whether it's your educational neighborhoods or whether it's your high school neighborhoods, where are they located throughout the country? This gives you an opportunity to use for new markets. It gives you better insight in your student population. I'll show you some of the attributes in just a second. But it also provides some very practical things as far as, tangible boots on the ground, right? Segmentation for ComFlow helps you with your travel, gives you high school level data on the schools that you're recruiting. And honestly, it's one of the least challenging to use. Once you understand what the numbers mean, it is a little bit less challenging to use. Liz, if you want to hit the next slide. This is a little bit about what makes up segment analysis, and there are 4 main sources that feed, there we go, 4 main sources that feed attributes. And I'm going to show you actually some of these attributes. You might not know exactly what that's referencing, but keep in mind there's high school level data in this as well. There's the assessment for questionnaires. Keep in mind those assessments may have been asked differently this year. So while it's all still very relevant, you still need to do your homework. If you use a third party, you need to make sure they're doing their homework as well. And those attributes lead to 33 educational neighborhoods and 29 high school clusters. What you get, an example on the next slide by way of a cluster is this type of information. And you can see on the left-hand side, there's a brief description of this cluster. And on the right-hand side, the attributes I mentioned a minute ago, this is where some of those are listed. And this is where you can begin to answer your question, why did I license that name? Right, I licensed that name because it's a low SES segment for us. And this is going to tell you what percentage of that cluster is low SES and what rank that cluster is amongst all of the clusters. So here's the reality is that if you bought this cluster to go after low SES kids, then you bought the wrong cluster. Sorry, licensed the wrong cluster. So this information is extremely helpful, as in most cases we're kind of retooling how we look at search and how we go about the process of licensing those names and choosing the sources that we use. There's many different attributes here that may eventually one day become one-offs, and we're able to segment and drill down in better ways in the future. Next slide, Liz. So briefly, we do search in-house, have done search in-house for a long time, and have been able to use tools like segment analysis. We've used EPS for many, many years. And we added this a year or maybe a little bit longer in the past, interest in my college. And this has been very good for us from the perspective that, I think Mary mentioned it earlier, is they're coming in a little more qualified than what a licensed name generally does. In a lot of cases, these students could even be treated as inquiries, maybe for your inquiry ComFlow. But that's going to be more important now than ever, is looking for those additional sources, looking for the ways students are able to opt in to those sources. You know, not everything comes down to you know, just a test score, and we've learned that. You've probably learned that as well. And looking for those different ways, those creative ways to kind of dive in and explore new options. So I would tell you there's three things here that are important for us, and I would encourage you to do the same. One is to know your pool. You're going to have some type of help, some type of assistance understanding that. Whether you use general zip codes, Claritas, or something like segment analysis, you have to know your pool. You have to know where your pool is not performing. And if you've already done some analysis of your 2021 class, there are places that your pool probably didn't perform well. We know that the recent article that came out in South Higher Ed even suggested that there are places due to test score options for admission that didn't perform as well as people thought they would. And then you're going to have to know how to adjust. And I think using tools like segment analysis or other services, using your staff to know how to adjust as you try to build that pool is going to be probably more important now than it ever has. And then looking, you know, kind of in the future, what does 23, what does 24, what does 25 look like? Encourage you to be flexible. Some things are not going to work. Some things are not going to work the way you had hoped or the way they had in the past. And you're going to have a need to be intentional as you move into kind of some of these post-pandemic search opportunities. You know, one of the things you want to be sure you do is that you license a name or you go after a name that you have a reason for, that you're intentional, that it's meaningful for your institution, and that you talk to them in a way that is meaningful to them. And one of the mistakes I see often is how we talk to low SES students when we send them communications that talk about how great of a value we are, when they may not even have the ability to pay for their own lunch at school. Well, then we're really not a value. If you're not free, you're really not a value, but yet you're sending a message to them that doesn't resonate, and it sometimes can be offensive. And there's many other examples that would suggest it is a benefit to not just the institution, but to the school to know their target and to know what they're going to tell them. Next slide, Liz. One of the ways, next slide. Well, I'll just go ahead and kill the suspense. Well, there you go. Big Futures, there's still time to register for some of the Big Future days. This is going to be another new opportunity to fill your buckets as you search and as you look for not just 22, but 23 and 24 students. This is going to be a great opportunity. So know that that's still coming, and we'll continue to add to those names that are available with the College Board. So if you have any questions, Liz McKenzie with the College Board, again, she's going to send you this slide deck as soon as we're done. And I'm going to see before I sign off, do we have anything any of you guys would like to add?
I just want to say thank you for attending. I know that it's hard to, in the middle of not being at a place, to stop and attend a session. So thanks a whole lot to everyone who attended, and do reach out with questions that you may have. And thanks to Mary and Jason for taking time out of their busy
schedule
to co-present.
Thanks for having us.
And no questions in Q&A. So I think, thank you for attending.
Perfectly.
Sorry?
We must have done this perfectly.
We did. We did. Thanks to all who attended. Have a great rest of SACAC. See you all.
Thanks, everybody. This is Tracy. I saw your numbers up to about 67, just so you know your attendance.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
You're welcome. Have a good day.
Ta-ta.
Whoop, whoop.